because of that, I've always been like, okay, well, that means I really cannot afford to slip up with my protein, right? And so I can say with honesty, I probably missed a couple of meals in the last year, maybe, just because I'm like, my training going well is very important to me. And this seems to be that, like, I just kind of noticed that really early on. I'm like, man, if I eat what I'm supposed to eat, I lift more weight than I did last week. That's super cool. I hate eating. I hate food, but I'm going to eat what I have to eat because I really like setting PRs. And I really delved into it. I took some classes in college that I found kind of helpful. Really, I didn't get a lot out of college. I've got an exercise physiology major. But as far as my coaching and my own athletics, I think maybe there were 4 classes that I took things away that actually maybe made me a better coach or athlete, but it wasn't 4 years worth. But one of the ones that I really did enjoy was like an advanced sports nutrition class, and like, obviously what's in academia is usually like 10 years on average behind or whatever that number is. So going out of my way to try to consume like more recent stuff and come to my own conclusions about maybe what needs to be optimized for a strength athlete versus a bodybuilder. Because I initially was like, well, I never grew very easily. I got very strong very quickly, and I looked oddly skinny for how strong I was. And that was always the case for me. So I always had it in the back of my head, hey, if I look muscular, then I'd be super strong, right? And it was a huge uphill battle because that just wasn't, I guess, my genetic strong suit. I would make a very bad bodybuilder based on how much effort I've had to put into growing compared to some other people. I'm sure you've seen millions of people that touch a weight and like, you're like, wow, I've been lifting for a decade and I do not look like that. That's ridiculous. And they aren't that strong either. And that was never my genetic strong suit, but I had this idea in my head that, okay, well, if I get big muscles, they're going to be super strong because the muscle I do have seems to be pretty strong. And so I started really kind of following a bodybuilding based nutrition plan. And the big thing that's changed since then is this idea that I think that maybe us as strength athletes have less leeway in terms of micronutrients. I don't have a mechanism of action, but it seems like you can become a high level bodybuilder with pretty noticeable micronutrient deficiencies within a diet, but you'd be very hard pressed to become a high level strength athlete with similar micronutrient deficiencies in the diet. So like, yes, we need to get our protein intake, and you can debate whether that's 1 gram or 1.5 grams, personal preference, per pound of body weight. Maybe we get 0.35 times our body weight in fat. So we hit that minimum level for hormonal production. And then we fill the rest of our calories with carbs. That's always been my basic philosophy. And back when I was following bodybuilding, that made sense to me. Is we have a certain amount of protein, after which we get diminishing returns. We have a certain amount of fat, after which maybe we get diminishing returns or no benefits at all in the case of fat once we meet that hormonal production. And then maybe theoretically we have this indefinite benefit to carbs. So I'm filling up all my carbs and I was getting pretty good results out of it, but I was very much kind of watching those bulking motivational videos and they're eating chicken and rice. And I started eating chicken and rice and I felt like shit all the time. I was like, what gives? I'm hitting my fat, it's not like I'm failing to produce testosterone. Right. And I really, I think Stan Efferding kind of was very influential in the strength industry for like making people kind of pay attention to micros a little bit. If you really want to say that you have a robust diet, don't just say, okay, well, here's my protein sources, here's my carb sources, and here's my fat sources. You should be able to point to somewhere in your diet for any major micronutrient. Was this idea that I got in my head is like, if I really want to say I'm on top of my nutrition, someone should ask me, well, hey, where's your zinc within your diet? Or, hey, where's your iodine? Or, where across all your meals are you sourcing at 5 grams of potassium? And that was the big thing that I think pushed me forward quite a bit was, hey, for me, the biggest predictor of how well I'm doing is my nutrition. And that was like a big breakthrough of a whole other half of nutrition that I didn't know existed. And I saw really quick returns by increasing my sodium and my potassium intake. My sleep got less bad by monitoring my magnesium and my D3 intake. And both those things were hugely helpful. And then the big bastard, Max, he sleeps like a baby. He could sleep for 16 hours at a time. And I think that's why he's so much bigger than me. He's like 4 inches taller than me, 50 pounds heavier than me, natural, just big bastard. I think it's because he sleeps so much. And he says I think it's interesting, right? Because I'm not going to tell anybody watching this that nutrition is the most important thing, because that probably varies by the person. Because Max can have an off day of eating and perform just fine. But if he doesn't sleep, he's super weak. And it's, I think that's another thing is just being realistic about, okay, well, here's all the things that matter. And then identifying for you specifically which one matters the most and holding yourself to a really high standard on that one. That was something I think I got out of the way early.
Yeah, that's, the personal variability, it makes it forever so hard to give the blanket advice. Well, what do you think is the most important? What's the tier list of things to be good? And it's like, I don't know, give me your genetic sequence and give me like a couple hundred years and I'll get to the bottom of it.
And I've always hated that on the internet, the obsession with the question, well, if you could only pick one. If you only pick one, you're going to be shit. I don't know what to tell you. You're going to be really bad at this. This is a terrible question.
So what do you, or how do you approach then the micronutrient stuff? Because that's pretty rare. I've gotten actually into some arguments with some friends who I thought had overhyped things like generic supplements at GNC or Clark's or wherever they happen to work. And I mean, part of the case that I made was so many guys don't do that, where you would expect that they would. Now, of course, there's always the good guys are the good guys because they're predisposed to being the good guys. And you're going to filter through a lot of the guys that don't have that shit in check, that might be better if they did. But how do you approach that? Is it through Whole Foods? I mean, do you just pop a multivitamin? What's your specific approach to keeping those in check?
Well, I'm super poor, so the supplement list is very limited. And I bought into the idea, and like my nutrition professor, he was a researcher, and he kind of pushed his own opinions, into the class a little bit. And he was very much this believer that 9 times out of 10, the whole foods source of micronutrients is going to be that much more bioavailable, and it's just that much more efficient to eat it in this. You're going to get some other stuff with it that's awesome, right? Like we have all these like potentially cancer preventative things that are coming in these vegetables that we're just eating for potassium, right? And avoiding cancer is awesome, right? And so, and it's cheaper than a multivitamin a lot of the time if you just go into like a produce section and buying it in bulk. So I've always kind of bought into this idea that like that better bioavailability is awesome. You got the obvious example of like heme iron from meat sources being infinitely more effective in fixing amenorrhea or people being iron deficient compared to the supplements that they're often prescribed. And so I bought into that idea pretty quickly. So I'm like, okay, well, in a perfect world, I would like to source all of my micronutrients from whole foods. And like, there's a couple that are probably impractical, like vitamin D3, unless you're drinking fortified milk. If you live up north, not the easiest thing in the world. Magnesium, unless you want to eat a ton of almonds or pumpkin seeds, probably not the easiest thing in the world. So maybe supplementing those things that are really you have to go out of your way in the diet. But I'm not big on supplements. And I think the big thing that really clicked for me is, like you said, there's a lot of top guys that don't touch a single like vitamin supplement, and they're doing just fine. And I think that Stan Efferding has a pretty good general explanation for that, which is that like, hey, you can make it to a very high level eating horizontally. So you're eating a little bit of a lot of different foods, because if nothing else, that's probably checking your boxes for the majority of your micronutrients. If we're eating this super wide array of foods, we are probably getting a little bit of a lot of those micronutrients. It adds up. It's not like a bodybuilding diet where if we're eating a lot of a couple of things and those couple of things don't have something, we're screwed, right? And we're going to be nutrient deficient. If someone's eating a very heavily varied diet, like kind of the traditional old school strongman diet, which is I eat kind of like a regular American, just in huge quantities, right? You're going to check a lot of boxes because you're eating a wide variety of food, and you're probably going to be able to avoid those severe micronutrient deficiencies that might hamper your training, right? You're probably going to be running to the bathroom a million times a day, right? And that's probably maybe why we move towards a little bit more conscious, like micronutrient conscious bodybuilding diet, but you can get away with that for sure. And I think that's how so many athletes don't put very much thought into their micronutrients and see so much success, is by having such a varied diet. Like kind of within like high level strongman, you could say you have two schools of thought, right? You have like Stan Efferding working with Hafthor and briefly Brian Shaw and a couple other people. And then you have Nathan Payton working with like obviously a whole host of World's Strongest Man competitors. And if you look at Nathan Payton's diets, they're way more varied. I'm sure he doesn't need to pencil out each micronutrient if he's sending them off to eat a cheat meal every single day after training, right? You've got that kind of safety net that comes with a much more varied diet. And I think that can also be a fix to the issue of micronutrient deficiency. As someone with bad digestion, that fix doesn't work very well for me. So I kind of went that Stan Efferding, like, no, we're going to eat a bodybuilding diet and then put thought into where we're getting each of the micronutrients instead, just so your stomach doesn't hurt all the time. But if you're someone whose stomach works great, eating that, like, Stan Efferding says pizza, pasta, pancakes diet of just like, yeah, I hit a hard training session, I go eat Five Guys. If you fit some fruits and veggies in there, that's a perfectly fine performance diet. I just don't have the stomach to do so.
And there's another factor, which is how big's your frame? How big are you trying to get? Because, and I heard secondhand, I don't know how accurate it is, but Brian was having issues getting enough calories in with what he was doing with Stan Efferding. And when you're, 6'8" to 6'10", trying to get 400 to 50 pounds about body weight, the calorie density is a huge draw. For us, more hobbit built strong men, under 6 feet, usually smaller frames, especially given how much more athletic our events tend to be. And that's just a difference between the types of federations and events that get put on. We don't really have a version of the Arnold Classic where it's a 1,500 pound yoke and a 440 pound log and a almost 600 pound stone. Almost all middleweight stuff and below is reminiscent of older World's Strongest Man. It's faster. There's more medleys, whatever. And it's in our best interest to be leaner, which I'm not. My claim to fame, everybody has their profession, followed by strongest man, world's strongest pizza cutter, whatever. I'm the world's fattest middleweight. Like that's of all the guys that go to any of the highest level shows. And I know this, I was talking earlier about the things I give up that I know I give up, that I give up body fat. Cause if I cut, my biggest cut was from like 265 down to 231 in about 3 or 4 days. And I was probably 22% body fat, where the other guys you see are just jacked to the tits. They look better, obviously better faces for the sport for sure, but they perform better because when they cut from 260, that's a hard 260. And that just seems to line up so much better with a bodybuilding style diet. And that's a hurdle I'm trying to get over it, because funny, we speak of Stan Efferding. One of the things I've written on my whiteboard is they'll never listen to you when you're fat. And he said that on like the Dave Tate podcast. And I'm like, I need to say that to myself every night before I go to sleep, because I keep trying to like get down into this, chicken, rice, egg whites. It's easy. It's cheap. Prepping is a breeze. It's 2022. You can do all this amazing work with like no effort. And I still have these psychological self-imposed hurdles to get over that. But that's the truth. It's like, if you can have the muscle, if you can get the mass along with the skill acquisition, and you can be a reasonable body fat percentage, that's where it is. So would you say that you follow something that looks pretty closely to like Efferding's vertical diet stuff? Like you just kind of niche down into a few food choices and that's it?
Oh yeah, I eat my meals. I eat 6 times a day, and they look almost the same. And part of that's because I've got the privilege of working from home. So it's like I have no excuse not to. I just need to go walk into the kitchen. I've got a big bin of ground beef that I already cooked. Got some cold rice. Like I've got no reason not to eat it. And especially as a guy with a smaller appetite, I would like to get up north of 300 pounds. Frankly, I feel pretty good at 255. I've been up to 260, 265. I feel decent still. I don't carry the weight as well as my brother, but I still feel good, especially as long as I stay on top of maintaining some base level of like aerobic capacity. I can push my calories pretty hard. I can push my body weight pretty hard. I feel pretty good. My blood work still looks good. And I've got some lifts in my head that I would like to reach before I really decide what I'm doing with my, strength career, if you want to call it that, right? Career implies there's money, but whatever you want to call it, I've got like a level of strength. I'm like, I just want to get to that first, and then I'll decide what the hell to do with it. I don't see any reason that if I gain a couple more pounds, I can't bench 600. I don't see any reason for any of these things. I would like to get up north of the 300. So if I've got a small appetite and I want to weigh 300 pounds, well, shit, I got to eat more often, right? And I would say that my diet, I eat the exact same everything every day. I've got a note. I'm very neurotic about these things. It freaks me out if I deviate from my notebook. And thankfully, I've put myself in a position where I can hit my notebook every day. But in college, it was like a nightmare of me just being anxious because I didn't drink my 2 gallons of water, or I missed meal 6 or whatever it was. But nowadays, I've got no excuse. I work from home, and I've got a notebook, and in my notebook I log my cardio at the top. Below that I log my training, so like all of my warm-ups through my work sets, all of my accessories, just to kind of keep track of my weights and just make sure progressive overload is gradually happening with time on those accessories as kind of an accountability thing. Below that I have a thing where I make sure I have a little checkbox if I hit my 10,000 steps per day, to try to keep my NEAT high. I've got my 6 meals that I pencil in what I ate. It's always the same thing every day. And then below that I've got like my mobility routine. I've got like a little work section, making sure I actually check in with a certain number of clients every day, because I realized if it's not in my notebook, it's not for sure going to get done. And that notebook is my true, just like accountability of like, every single page of this book should look like the day of a high level strength athlete if I want to be a high level strength athlete. It's that simple, right? It's not like the order people get reversed. It's like, well, I'm going to get good and then I'm going to have the habits of a good guy. That's not how it works. You have the habits of a high level strength athlete for years before you're a high level strength athlete. So it's kind of, and like Dorian Yates kind of talked about that, of like having his logbook of like his food. And he's like, I want to be able to look back at that book if I'm prepping for a competition and be like, damn, this is perfect. I am ready. I could not have done better. And these pages of this book tell me that. And that's something I try to do.